Hello. So this recap video is actually going to be for 2 of our weeks. So we talked about moral authority and the big 3, and then we tied that into incarnational evangelization the next week. It kind of just carried over the big 3 conversation. But we started with the story of Agnes Gonza Bahayu. I don't know if that's how you say it. But it goes on to talk about this woman who lived a pretty discreet life at first. But with time, people came to see the way she was living her life became very influential. And ultimately, we find that this person is Mother Teresa. So even though she was going and she was serving the poorest of the poor, she had no reason to be known by anybody. She actually was known by the whole world because she lived the way that Christ had asked her to, and she did what she knew the Lord was inviting her to do. And so that is what we call moral authority. And so moral authority is the ability to lead others not by our title or the position that we've been given, but by the way we live. And but it's more than just like doing what you say you're going to do as well. But it's a little bit more of like, are you living the way the Lord's invited you to live, and are you a witness to others? So we talked a little bit about that, and then we went into Christian leadership. And so why does this matter? And that's a huge question. As we are leaders in our parishes, in our community, even in our workplace, why does it matter if we're leading from a Christian perspective? But the reality is that everything we do should point people back to God. And so, if we're rooted in our prayer life, if we're rooted in our Christian faith, that should influence the way we lead people. And so there's just a great quote that says, "We are affected more deeply toward God by a 10-minute visit with a saintly person than we are in 10 years spent with a mediocre individual." And that was Thomas Dubay. And I can say I've experienced that myself. People who have been very influential on my life and in my conversion and different things were actually people that were only in my life for a couple of days, 2 weeks maybe. But you could just tell there was something different about them. And that's what gave them the authority to speak into the things that I was doing or struggling with. So then we talked about the big 3, which are the 3 virtues that FOCUS likes to really hone in on when we're talking about growing in virtue. And these are ones that tend to affect a lot of people. And so the big 3 is chastity, sobriety, and excellence. And so the discipleship articles go into a little bit more depth of what they are, but at quick glance, chastity is about having the ability to love others in the way that God has called us to love, with a purity of heart and mind, and not as a slave to selfishness or lust, is kind of the quick and simple version. And then sobriety is the exercise of the virtue of temperance, which is self-control, when it comes to alcohol, drugs, and other substances. Something that we got to talk about is that sobriety is not just alcohol and drugs. That's what we see the most on a college campus, but it also is relating to your cell phone or food or anything that takes you from living in reality. So sobriety helps you to be of sound body and mind, to be able to make decisions when you are actually present. And then excellence is the ability to give the best of ourselves in our vocation and daily responsibilities. So it's not about being perfect, but it's about doing what you need to do and doing it well. And so a lot of times I think there's a lot in here that talks about perfection, how it's not perfection, and people struggle with perfectionism. So these are some great things to keep reading if you'd like to learn more about those 3. So finally, we're going to talk about incarnational evangelization. And so the story starts off with talking about John Paul II and how he had a group of friends that he deeply invested in at the start of his priesthood. And those people remained friends with him for the rest of his life through his time as Pope. And Yeah, John Paul II is just a great example of this. You can see in many documentaries or stories of him, he would go skiing with people, he would go kayaking, he loved the outdoors, he did things that were not at all remotely Catholic with people, and through those activities, through that time spent with them, was able to have authentic Catholic conversations down the road with those people. So incarnational evangelization is not so much about the evangelization side as much as is the incarnation side. And so the incarnation is when, so how God came as Jesus from heaven, he took on human flesh and became like us in all things except sin. That is what we're doing with other people, where we get to go and spend time with them, do what they want, to become like them, not in like a fake way or a false way, but to do things that they like for the sake of building a friendship and a trust, so that down the road when you want to talk about your faith, that door and that path is opened. So I had a friend who, she was terrified of rock climbing, did not want to do it. But one of the students on campus loved rock climbing and invited her to do it with her. And so my friend's like, I have to go and rock climb because this student is giving me an invitation. It's an invitation into her life. We sometimes see it as an invitation to rock climbing, but it's actually an invitation into her life. So sucking it up, saying yes, going and trying something you don't want to do sometimes is actually good. And so it allowed her to spend time with that student. And through that, it opened the door to having more conversations about God down the road. And I just don't know if that trust would have been there if my friend had said no to every invitation that this girl had been making, because she wanted to get to know her better. So so that's kind of what incarnational evangelization is about. But it all starts with having an incarnational heart. So do we have the heart to go out and to see people, knowing that everyone will end up in heaven or hell one day? And so do we have the disposition knowing that our actions now can affect someone's eternity later? Another one that I just absolutely love is that they talk about being a jacuzzi Christian, and how sometimes it's so easy to just stay in the little bubble. And when you get out of a jacuzzi, it's cold. And when you get out of the Christian or the Catholic bubble, sometimes it's hard. And so are we willing to put ourselves in situations that are uncomfortable? Not dangerous, not like bad, but just uncomfortable for the sake of someone else. And then finally, it just talks about the importance of investing outside of formal settings. So there's only so much you can get to know someone in a formal setting. So if you're in a Bible study or like a men's or a women's group, you have a topic, you have an agenda that you're talking about, and so you can get to know the people. But when you go and you grab coffee with someone after and there is no agenda, all of a sudden there's a space to have conversation that was not there in structured settings. And so that's one of the really big things, is just taking the time to invest in other people and getting to know them. So that was our topics. And so, hopefully you enjoyed those.